Let's jump in. Okay, so let's start with incrementality testing, right? Let me hide my little stupid ribbon here. Okay, so before we jump in, I just want to go back to the last class where we talked about the funnel, right? Now, we talked about how marketing measurement is somewhat tied to the funnel because what audiences that you're talking to in what context, whether you're just creating awareness or you're trying to create demand through consideration, and then or your lower funnel retargeting, brand search kind of things, or you're talking to existing customers. The reason why it's important is because the kind of tests that you would deploy, it very much depends on the audiences and the funnel context and you talk to them, right? The tests and measurement in general that you deploy depends on that, okay? Now, today, what we're going to talk about is basically all the incrementality testing, okay? There are incrementality testing really for prospecting specifically. There's also incrementality testing for retention marketing. There's an entire class on that, and classic RCT testing. We're going to cover that with the case studies and whatnot. But in this class, we're going to talk about fundamentally how do you test new customer acquisition media, right? Facebook broad audiences, Google non-branded search, Roku, TV, retargeting to some extent, all of those things, and how do you test them is kind of what we're going to talk about in this class. Okay, and so basically what happens is it kind of and that's the quick sort of a setup for this. Okay, and they live in this part of the funnel, which is the mid part of the funnel, so to speak. All right. When you talk about incrementality testing, specifically for prospecting, okay, this is the entire universe of all the tests you need to worry about. There's a lot of theory, a lot of literature about specific types of tests. And one of the challenges in the space, which we are trying to address in this class, is that you will find that if you're a vendor doing one particular type of thing, if you're doing sort of match market testing, or if you're doing marketing mix modeling, you want to essentially, naturally, you look at the world through that lens. And so that's the only technique that really matters and everything else doesn't matter, right? Which actually is not true. Which is why we want an academic sort of like a classroom-like setting where we kind of discuss the pros and cons of each approach and how do you bring them together in a way that creates 1 + 1 = 3 kind of an outcome for your brand, right? And how do you do that? So and therefore in this context, there's a lot of tests, but the proven market tested approaches for testing is basically this slide. So if you want to just print it, pin it on your desk, all you have to do is worry about these kind of tests, okay? I've taken a little liberty to kind of simplify all the little categories here so you can kind of easy mental model of how to think about these tests. There are two types of tests. One is split testing, one is match market testing, okay? Now, what is split testing? Split testing is a classic RCT design where you take an audience and you take a sample of the audience and you split the audience into two buckets, A and a B. A gets a treatment, B gets a treatment, and the difference between the treatments is basically lift, okay? Now, that's what split testing is. In the context of incrementality, what they do is that they take A and B. B gets a control treatment, whatever the control is. Typically, it's a holdout. You don't give them any campaigns. You don't expose them to any media. That's the control. And then A gets the exposure to the campaign media. The difference in the response rates is now interpreted as lift. Okay, that's the classic RCT approach. Now, the thing is, you cannot do RCT testing on all channels because these are not your audiences. These are prospecting audiences. These are Facebook's audiences, Snap's audiences, or Yelp's audiences, or Roku's audiences. You don't have access to them. It's not in your customer file. So you have no way to split them like that. So in many cases, you have to do what's called geo match market testing, which is basically splitting markets as opposed to audiences, right? Which is kind of a proxy for audiences. So what we do is we take markets, and the markets could be defined across various grains. Okay, we could define a market as a state, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, and those are markets. Or you could define them as DMAs. 210 DMAs, 212 DMAs in the country. So the New York DMA, the Boston DMA, and so on and so forth. And you can actually look at them by DMAs, or you can look at them by cities, or you can look at that by states or zip codes. Okay, different market grains you can do the geo match market testing, and we'll go a little bit deeper into that. Okay, but that's the two big buckets of testing. One is split testing, which is a classic RCT approach. Second is the geo match market testing. Okay, now the beauty about geo match market testing is that it is can be fully anchored on first party data, and that's why it's becoming more and more often accepted and adopted approach across the industry, because you can control the testing. Number one, it is based on your first party data. You're not dependent on Facebook's internal device graph or internal data or any internal data sets that they have that you don't have access to. And it's not opaque. It's not like they're going to give you a result and that's all they can give you. You can eat it or not. It's not like that. You have transparency and control over the, the testing experience and the results. Okay. So it's based on first party data. It's a big reason why it's gained significant popularity in the last 5-7 years. Number one. Number two, you can use the same geo match market testing approach to test all channels, most channels. Okay, so you can test the same approach for testing Roku and Facebook and Snap and Yelp and search and whatnot. So therefore, when you get a result and for search and you look at a result for Roku, you know they're using the same approach, and therefore there's more apples to apples than taking a Roku lift test and comparing it to a Facebook lift test, which are in their own currency, so to speak, right? So you kind of remove all those anomalies, and now you can take essentially the same approach for testing all channels. So relatively, you can be more certain that the results you're getting are comparable among the channels. Okay, so that's a reason why geo match market testing has really taken off in the last 5-6 years. Now, what also has happened is that if you're talking about prospecting, which is like new customer acquisition, more or less, this is kind of the winner in the testing category. This is the approach that you have to use because there is really nothing else you can use, right? There are approaches you can take, but fundamentally from a testing perspective, this is the clear and outsized winner in terms of framework and approach for testing, prospecting media. Okay, that's geomatch market testing. Okay, now there are two types of tests underneath that. The one is called an incrementality test. One is called a scale test. Okay. Now, an incrementality test is basically designed to measure the business impact of investments you're making right now. Let's say, for example, you've got $100,000 a week going into Facebook, right? You're having $50,000 a week going into Roku, right? And your question is, what is it doing for my business? Is it driving 5% of my business or 30% of my business? What is the Facebook media driving for me? What is Roku driving for me? Is it driving 1% of my business or 6% of my business? How much impact is it creating for me for the current levels of spend? That business question is answered via an incrementality test. Okay. Now, the second question you typically start asking is that, okay, I'm an emerging brand, I'm growing fast. That's a good question to ask. I want the answer, but I also want the answer for the next question, which is, what happens if I spend another $100,000 a week on Facebook? Let's say if I have good faith in Facebook, I have a sense that it's driving roughly half my business. Okay. Now, if I add another $100,000, am I going to get another 50% more conversions and revenue or new customers from my business? Or what's going to happen on the next $100,000, the marginal $100,000 that I'm going to spend? What is the marginal returns I'll get? Now, why this is important is that in media, there is a concept called diminishing returns. Okay, a lot of you guys might have already heard about this concept multiple times, which is the second dollar is less efficient than the first dollar, the 10th dollar is less efficient than the 9th dollar, and so on and so forth. So as you increase your spend, performance gets worse. Okay, it doesn't work like a perfect law, but close enough, right? There's a lot of anomalies to it, and depending on how big the audience is and how much you're spending, and there's a variety of factors that affect it. But you can think of it more or less as a good principle to say, as you spend more and more dollars, the marginal CPA, the marginal ROAS, the marginal ROI will diminish as you spend more dollars into that particular channel. Okay, so how do you understand that? That particular diminishing returns is measured through something called scale testing. So you can basically take out of the 50 markets, you can take small 5 or 6 markets and pretend you're spending 2x the budget not pretend, but you can actually spend 2x the budgets on those markets. Okay. So now you can identify how those markets behave or observe how those markets behave and use that as a dipstick to understand what might happen nationally when you scale the program, right? So that's the idea of scale testing. Just take basically a small market and simulate scaling the media, whatever it is, Facebook or Roku, observe how those markets behave and use that as a dipstick to understand how the national execution might pan out if you do that nationally. Okay, so that's called scale testing. Now you can do incrementality and scale testing on both sides, both on the geo match market testing side and on the audience split testing side. Okay, and the idea is the same, the execution is different. Okay, now let's go to the split testing for a second. Now, a lot of the split testing you might end up doing for prospecting may